Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video, I'm going to be doing a book recommendations video. Now, I did something similar to this along the lines of like college recommendations. It's a video called Book Recommendations Based on Your College Major, and that one is definitely based more off of like your college major, and I just chose different majors and then recommended books for them. I will leave that in the description box as well as the cards if you'd like to check it out. Along the same lines, this is sort of like that, but this is just going to be from my own experience. So these are definitely books I read in the past year, just because a lot of my professors during the pandemic have been assigning a lot more fiction, I think, to break up the much heavier text and the research papers. But I've been reading a ton of fiction in my classes, and I just thought after 3 years of college, because I am a junior right now, I would put together a list of some of my favorite books of all time that I have read in my years of college. Some of these will be books, and then some will be short stories from short story collections, or poems. Why did I say that so weird? Poems. And yeah, I just thought I'd share with you guys to show you what I'm reading in class and to give you some inspiration on some, I guess, educational texts that you could read that I read and like what context I read them in. So anyways, let's get started into the video. So the first book we're going to talk about is Days of Distraction by Alexandra Chang. Now, I've raved about this so much. If you watched my book haul where I featured this, and then my wrap up where I wrap this up, I read this for my intro to Asian American literature class, and this book was like our final text of the semester, and it was the last book that I read for that class, or last piece of text. And I just am so glad that the professor ended the class with this book, because this was just like a wrap up of like basically the entire course. We also got to speak to the author, who came into one of our Zoom classes, which was really cool because I kind of got to pick her brain about some of the writing choices she made, which is what I often like to do as a creative writing major to help inform my own writing as well. So this is basically a portrait of a Chinese American woman who is moving across the country and re-examining her relationship, her career, her own identity, and relative to her career and like where she is physically. This book is just beautiful and amazing. It's written in this really unique form called like vignettes, where it's like short paragraphs that are just very like ephemeral feeling. But even though the form itself is very fast, it feels really fast, it is actually a very painstakingly slow-paced book, and I think that's why it puts some people off. But I think it's like meant to be slow because it's supposed to like kind of emulate her thoughts and her recollections and just her like basically thinking through everything, like distracted from her thoughts. So I thought the writing style very much fit the content, and I love when form fits content. So I'd recommend this book if you're definitely looking for more Asian American literature to read. I love this one. I thought this was the book that was closest to my own perspective and experience as an Asian American. It might not be for everyone, but I loved it. Okay, so the next piece we're actually going to talk about is a short story from the short story collection The Interpreter of Maladies from Jhumpa Lahiri. I know Jhumpa Lahiri just came out with a new book called Whereabouts, and I'm very much waiting to get my hands on that because I have a rewards program with my independent bookstore, so I'm waiting until that kicks in, then I can get a free book, and getting that book because it's signed. But anyways, besides that, I read Mrs. Sen in one of our first pieces, and Interpreter of Maladies is the short story collection that follows Indian Americans in India and the US. So Miss Sen, basically, the reason I love this short story so much is definitely the perspective. We follow the perspective of Elliot, this 11-year-old boy, and he, through his lens, it's kind of this biased lens because we're watching Mrs. Sen, who is from Calcutta originally, and she immigrated to the US, and she's the caretaker of Elliot, this kid, and we are seeing her culture and her kind of recollecting her past life in Calcutta and all her memories through the lens of Elliot. And I just thought that was so interesting. I love interesting perspectives, things that are very refreshing and different, and I am so excited to read the other short stories a part of that collection and Whereabouts as well. If you've read any of her books, let me know how you like them. Let me know what your favorite short story was. But Mrs. Sen is definitely a short story that after I read it, I had to read it again, and then I really just appreciated so much about how I was trying to think of like how the story would change if this perspective changed of the author, because we are seeing it through this very biased lens of an 11-year-old. So yeah, that's why I love that short story so much, and I can't wait to read more of her work. So the next piece is also from that same Asian American lit class, and it's actually a poem from a poetry collection by Marilyn Chin, and the poem is How I Got My Name. Yes, How I Got My Name by Marilyn Chin, an essay on assimilation. And just like the title says, it's basically an essay on assimilation. It kind of is, I wouldn't consider it prose poetry, but it's so fast, like the lines are just so like one after the other. I'm not really adept at like describing poetry, but I do appreciate when some poems have a lot of things that I like there are historical like allusions, and then there's like references to pop culture, and then just the way it was written and the very specific details and imagery that this poem was evoking is just so fascinating to me. And for an assignment for class, actually, I remember I had to write a poem in the same style as that, and I just had so much fun putting in a bunch of like my own specific life details and experiences and references to pop culture, and using her poem as a model to write this essay on assimilation. And I also really love the tone of the poem. It's very sarcastic, and it's very just like, it's kind of angry also, and I really love that, how that comes through in the poem. So that's definitely one of my favorite poems I've read the entire semester. So the next book that I'm recommending is Through the Arc of the Rainforest by Karente Yamashita, and I actually read this in a class that was kind of an intersection between my environmental studies and creative writing major. I forgot what the class is called, but it was like literature of the natural world or something like that. And when she told us we'd be reading, we read a lot of fiction. I think everything that we read in that class was fiction, and this book I had never heard of, and I'm always so excited when I hear books that I've never heard of, because I'm like, this is just widening my genres, widening my interest. This is a hilarious comedy, kind of satirical book that follows a whimsical and hilarious cast of characters who all have a role to play in the destruction of the rainforest and the extinction of all the birds in Brazil. And this is just such a whimsical book. It's super over the top, super dramatic. There are some really out there motifs. One of the main characters has like a ball attached to his head that like kind of is able to see everything for him. It's just so interesting how she was able to take, the author was able to take this kind of over-the-top idea and somehow relate it to climate change and environmental destruction, which is one of the main themes of this book, how all of these characters have a role to play in the destruction of the rainforest, but they all go about it in really different ways. And I just really loved how funny it was also. And just like I said, over the top, but overall it's grounded by the environmental themes. I love this book. I would definitely check this book out if you're looking for more environmental books to talk about climate change and capitalism and environmental degradation. I would definitely highly recommend this book. So the next book I'm recommending is also from that same class, and it is called The Hungry Tide by Amitav Ghosh. And if you ever get a chance to read Amitav Ghosh's other works, he has this work called The Great Derangement, which is is like interesting commentary on environmental writing and the way environmentalism is like perceived in the media. I read that for a class as well, so that was super interesting. But this, if you're looking for a work of fiction that has very much environmental conservation themes and also has really just fun characters, I would definitely check this out. The Hungry Tide, it takes place in India in this chain of islands called the Sundarbans, and the people who live on this island basically live in fear of the island and nature because they're very superstitious, and they're afraid of the creatures there, the tigers there, and like of natural disasters and what nature will bring. So in enters our main character, Pia, who is a marine biologist, and I really thought it was interesting because we follow many different characters in this book, but her character was very interesting because you're seeing nature and you're perceiving nature from this very biased lens. Again, like, she's a marine biologist, she has this deep appreciation for nature in this way that she's very connected to it in a way that the people of the island are not. So it was very interesting watching her come in and bringing her perspective, and she sort of realizes through working with these people and working with a fisherman there, and one of the people who live there, that this is an island in peril, and like the histories of this island and the perils of conservation and how it affects human lives. I would highly recommend this book. This is actually one of the best in terms of like pacing, I feel like. The environmental themes were very subtle. I thought it talked a lot about mostly like conservation, that conservation idea, and like also the you know, this island is being wrought about by like climate change and being affected by climate change. But I would recommend this book also just because of the characters are just, it's a fun cast, and it's also just, you're kind of like living through a lot of stuff that happened in this book with them, and it's just awesome. It has a really great plot, and I'd highly recommend this book. So the next book that I'm recommending is called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This book is such a special book to me, which is weird that I still don't own a copy of this book. I read this in my freshman year of college for a night class called Environmental Classics, and that is kind of like what I consider in my mind to be an environmental classic, a book that will stand the test of time, that talks about the environment and will be a guide for environmentalism in years to come. And it's so funny because I actually like proctored this class now, so I've been able to reread it for many years after because I have to read it again to kind of follow with the discussion. This book is super special. I think there's just so many things to talk about this book that I can't really describe it in this video. I could honestly do a whole video review just on Braiding Sweetgrass, but it's a very interesting perspective. I think this is a book, if you're interested in environmentalism and environmental studies in the least, is one book that that has to be on your list, because you cannot advocate for the environment and talk about the environment without talking about indigenous wisdom and like their investment in the environment and nature. And I think this book is a lens that is not really captured so much in mainstream environmentalism, and one that is sort of forgotten. It's sort of overshadowed by like white environmentalists and stories like mainstream modern environmentalism. I would highly recommend that book. It is just beautiful, lyrically written, so many storytelling vibes in a book about the environment that will teach you to appreciate nature in a brand new way, and it is just magic. I've reread it like 3 times now, and I really need to get myself a copy. Okay, and the final book that I'll be recommending is another environmental book, and it is A Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. And on the other end of the spectrum, as I was just talking about, a book about indigenous wisdom, this is a book that was written in the 1950s by a white man. His perspective on the environment, and it follows Leopold as he is it is going through many seasons, and he is observing nature and watching the birds. I love this. This is like my comfort environmental read. If I ever am just feeling sad, I usually pick up this book and read his descriptions of nature because they are just so beautiful. They're very ephemeral, very like metaphorical. It teaches you that like seasons change, things regrow, and kind of our connection to nature. And it also has illustrations that just give me like the smallest dose of serotonin every time I read it. This is a used copy from my bookstore. I really just love having this like mass market paperback in my hands because it's so comforting. But like I said, this is definitely not the best like lens of environmentalism, but it is a comfort read that I go back to every now and then just to read about beautiful descriptions of nature and to teach me to appreciate nature and the environment. So again, this book I love, but also it is not probably the best portrayal of environmentalism. Okay, so those were all the books that I have just loved and are the most memorable books that I've read in my college career so far. I'm excited to finally go into my senior year of college and just read a ton more, and hopefully I'll have an updated video for you in a year. But other than that, let me know some of the books that you loved reading in college or high school even. I know in high school I just read a ton of classics and I was not a fan of that. But let me know your recommendations down below, and I'll see you on my next one. Bye.